Broadcasting live from atop the Rocky Mountains, the crossroads of the West. You are listening to the Liberty Roundtable Radio Talk Show.
All right, happy to have you along, my fellow Americans. Sam Bushman, Lowell Nelson, Campaign for Liberty.org with me. All kinds of things relating to the Constitution, to you and me, to our liberties, FISA 702, and more. Where on earth has our privacy gone? Where on earth is the supreme law of our land? It seems to be that it's trampled on underfoot by wicked people everywhere. But the answer is to stand with God, family, and country. When it comes to God, it's Scripture. When it comes to family, it's the God-ordained traditional family. And when it comes to the country, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights should be the political religion of our nation. Welcome to the show. I'm Sam Bushman. Lowell Nelson, welcome back, my friend. How are you doing, sir?
Well, very good, Sam. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on Liberty Roundtable Live.
Ron Paul, Judge Andrew Napolitano team up with two columns coming out of the gate that absolutely set the stage, sir.
Hope for America is the title of Ron's column, which reminds me of his campaign back in 2007 and 8 and 11 and 12. And so it was fun to read his column. But in this column, he talks about really more about a conference held by his Institute for Peace and Prosperity. The theme of the conference was War is Back on the Menu. And it highlighted Trump's disastrous decision to attack Iran both last June and again in February. He mentions an address by Professor Robert Pape from the University of Chicago, who wisely suggested that we let the states in the region manage their own security. Quote, "It is not our job to be their policemen," quote, and end of quote, he said. Well, a couple of the speakers put principle above politics when it would have been easier and more lucrative to have gone along with the president. He was talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was a general in the MAGA army. And, of course, she feels betrayed now by the man who she spent so much time and money helping to get elected, first with the president's support for tyrannical central bank digital currency, and then with his refusal to release the Epstein files. Finally, she explained after he dubbed her a traitor for disagreeing with him on these issues, constant death threats forced her to resign her seat in the House. Yeah, sure, she could have gone along just to get along, as most do in Congress, but instead she stood up for what is right. And likewise, Joe Kent, who was serving as Director of Counterterrorism at the Office of National Intelligence, he could have kept quiet as he watched another war being launched too. But he calls it the war launched on a mountain of lies pushed by special interests. Now, Joe Kent is a highly decorated U.S. combat veteran who held a Senate-confirmed position in the administration. And that would have been a golden ticket to any number of future profitable opportunities if he played his cards right. But instead, ladies and gentlemen, he did what was right. He resigned, writing in a statement that the war was not justified and that it was being fought for Israeli rather than American interests. So he, too, was demonized by the Trump administration for standing up for his values and principles. Ron writes, quote, "Their courage in making this sacrifice for truth should inspire all of us. It should give us hope," end quote. Which really brings me to something I pray nearly every day, Sam. I pray that good men and women will stand up for truth and righteousness wherever they may be. Now, of course, I don't pray for them by name, most of them, because I don't know who they are, but when good people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Joe Kent come forward, then I know their names, and so I can express my gratitude for them by name.
Well, and there are people, unnamed intentionally so, worldwide that are standing up for these same principles, many even in foreign countries, communist countries and everything else, where their hearts tell them that there's a God, that there's a supreme being, that they can pray to that supreme being for relief and guidance. And whether they're actual Christians or whether they even have a different religion, oftentimes, our relationship with God and our humble hearts and everything oftentimes transcends some of those religious things, especially when you don't have knowledge of truth in many cases, but you hope for and believe in. That's why this column from Ron Paul, Hope for America, is so critical, folks. We do pray for these people, and we do pray for righteousness, and we pray for greater understanding for everyone who has a desire, right? So Ron Paul in this column has incredible words of encouragement, right? helping everybody understand, hey, you know what? We just need to do our part. That's our job. That's our responsibility, right?
Exactly. He says, quote, "My words of encouragement were simple. We don't need a majority to change things. A purposeful minority dedicated to the principles of peace and liberty can move mountains. We must stay strong and, importantly, stick together and work together across all party and ideological lines. We must be the big coalition that refuses to sacrifice our principles just as Joe and Marjorie refused to sacrifice theirs." End of quote. You know, Sam, I have a friend grew up with who worked for the NSA, and he's one of the good guys, and I'll just mention in passing here that he ordered his division. He was in charge of the whole division of the NSA, and nobody did any torture in his division. And it turns out that he obtained more good information, actionable intelligence, by being nice and civil to the prisoners for whom he had responsibility than all the rest of the divisions of the NSA put together.
That's because you back honor and truth and morality, and you don't thirst for blood. And at first they hear so many negative things about us, and they get here and they think infidels, haters, awful. And then when they get treated that way, they go, wait a minute. It isn't the way I was told. Here's the truth. Yeah. And so we gain more ground that way. And what I don't understand is even though we know that, we still seem to be stuck on stupid.
Well, Andrew Napolitano is one gentleman who's not stuck on stupid. In his column last week, he alerts us to another sobering development at the Supreme Court regarding general warrants. Quote, "The Fourth Amendment protects all persons from warrantless government searches and seizures of their persons, houses, papers, and effects. It requires that warrants be supported by probable cause of crime and specifically describe the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized," end of quote. But last week, Sam, for the first time in this century, and maybe the past 2 centuries, the government argued to the Supreme Court of the United States that the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution does not outlaw general warrants. Quote, "General warrants were issued in the colonial era by a secret court in London. They were not based on probable cause of crime," end of quote. And of course, they did not identify a suspect or even state what the supposed crime was being investigated. Well, general warrants were an egregious abuse of power. They let the government agent search wherever he wished and seize whatever he found. The justification for general warrants was the enforcement of the Stamp Act, right? They passed the Stamp Act and then they needed to enforce it, and so they legalized these general warrants. They wanted assurance that all papers, books, and newspapers in your possession be stamped. And you had to purchase stamps from the British, of course, so it was a tax in reality. And the general warrants was a cover or a pretext for spying on the colonists as the British were looking for subversive or revolutionary materials. Well, historians believe that the Stamp Act and the use of general warrants were the compelling reasons for the writing of the Fourth Amendment, which said very clearly that a warrant must describe, quote, "the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized," end of quote. Well, last week, Sam, Congress extended Section 702 of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They extended it for 45 days.
And shame on the Republicans and Democrats for this. Many of them voted against it, but obviously not enough. And this is where we hear over and over that the Republicans are more conservative and that they stand for what we believe in. And, and I do believe that's true in many cases. They are more conservative. But a lot of times it's only in rhetoric. It's only in talk. It's only in when they know they can stand and get a vote that makes their claim, but yet, doesn't change the game. When it really changes the game or when it really matters, then they, do something different. Healthcare is a great example. They were all against Obamacare, voted against it 40 plus times until it was really time to get rid of it. And then they doubled down and supported it, right? And they're kind of doing the same thing here. They talk big on 702, but at the end of the day, Congress wants to spy on you and me. The evidence is factually clear, Lowell.
Yes. The vote was 261 to 111 nays. Now, I'll tell you what, Sam, our U.S. representative here in Utah, Mike Kennedy, he voted nay on that 45-day extension, and he's going to vote nay on the extension of the Section 702 when it comes up at the end of the 45 days. That was the correct vote. That was a vote in defense of your right to be left alone, but Unfortunately, Sam, the other 3 representatives in Utah, guess how they voted?
They sold us down the river. They love to spy on their people.
They want to surveil you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, back
and
to
I know
the
I
court.
sound cynical and angry a little bit, Lowell, and I am. Because you know what? This is one of the most important things to understand. Why would we allow Congress or whatever to spy on the American people? Why would we allow the general government to do that? It violates some of the most fundamental freedoms and truths that we have, which is privacy. And the founders knew it, and that's what really was one of the big keys to them jettisoning King George for good, is he violated their privacy at every turn. And now we're doing the same exact thing as King George. In fact, since we have technology, it's even worse.
It is worse. You know, Justice Scalia recognized that the Fourth Amendment protects beliefs, thoughts, sensations, and emotions and in fact, he famously wrote that, quote, "There is nothing new in the realization that the Constitution sometimes insulates the criminality of a few in order to protect the privacy of us all," end of quote. You know, in other words, he's saying it's better to protect the privacy of everybody and let a few criminals, you know, give them a pass, just so we protect the privacy of all of us, right? Otherwise, you know, there will always be criminals around, but we don't want to make criminals out of everybody, and that's what surveillance does. It treats everybody, every one of us, like a criminal until we prove otherwise. So, Sam, here's hoping that Congress will finally sunset Section 702 of the FISA in the next 45 days, but I'm not holding my breath. Sam?
Well, I would say this. We pray that good men and women will stand up for truth and righteousness wherever they are, as we've highlighted. I just wanted to say it again because it's really important. But we also commend Judge Napolitano for highlighting that Congress sold us down the river last week with FISA 702. And the sad part is Trump basically said, hey, you know what? I guess what? Because you didn't opt out, you're in. Okay. Trump says as long as you did not inform your service provider of your wish for privacy, you don't get privacy. See, that's not the way it works, President Trump. And in my personal opinion, I know this sounds extreme, but I'm going to say it, Lowell, anyway. Trump should be impeached over that. How dare you? When all the scandals against Donald Trump happened, instead of defending Trump now, what we say is, hey, buddy, you didn't opt out of saying this. You didn't opt out of that. You didn't opt out. Therefore, hey, you're guilty. No, that's not the way it works, Trump. And you know it. And how dare you for even acting like that? I mean, it's a disgrace. Hey, you know what? You didn't opt out, Trump, so they get your tax returns, buddy. You know, and what Trump would rely on and what we would rely on is, no, that's the way it is. We're out for sure. There's not even an option to opt in. Your privacy should be maintained, and the government has to get a warrant. And the warrant has to be very specific, folks. See, that's all gone with Trump's attitude. And I say shame on the Donald for that. Triple shame on Donald for that. Justice Scalia recognized that the Fourth Amendment was vital and protect your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions. And hey, I know it seems strange that a few get away because of this. But if we lose this privacy, what's next in America to lose, Lowell?
Yeah, exactly right, Sam. Not only that, when you look at the U.S. Constitution, it has been eroded over many, many decades, unfortunately. And today, not much of it remains intact in practice or in actuality. Yeah, it's still there on paper, but it's not there in reality. You know, Lincoln destroyed states' rights in the 1860s, which turned our republic on its head and subordinated the states to the general government. No limits to the power of the general government after that. The constitutional prohibition on the income tax disappeared in 1913. Bush set aside habeas corpus and asserted presidential power to hold citizens indefinitely on suspicion alone without evidence presented to a court. Obama asserted the right of the president to execute American citizens on suspicion alone without due process of law. And Trump exercised that unlawful power too. Now, most Americans do not comprehend the threats to their freedom, Sam, but what's his name? Roberts. Yeah, Paul Craig Roberts, in this column entitled "Putting Americans into Digital Prison," highlights this executive order from President Trump, which basically does that, puts us in a digital prison. He asks this sobering question: will this coming July 4th be the last time Americans hear about Americans' unsurpassed freedom and the men who gave their lives for us to have it? You know, that's the question he asks. And finally he writes this, quote,
and hold on, let me add to that.
Yeah,
with the modern AI, the modern monitoring, so AI combined with constant I don't know what to say, recording of your audio and video everywhere, and so constant monitoring combined with AI, folks, they've got a super juggernaut high-tech ability that has never been known in the world before. And so if this gets turned by evil, satanic, wicked government against us, heaven help us, Lowell.
Well, in the essence of this executive order, Sam, is that basically every American will be forced to hand over their biometric facial data or be locked out of the banking system entirely. And the Treasury Secretary,
how dare they?
Yeah, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed that the policy is in process. Quote, banks will be required to verify every customer's citizenship using a U.S. passport containing embedded RFID chips and government-ready facial recognition biometrics. No passport, no bank account, period. Real IDs, driver's licenses, and every other common document will not suffice. This is not border security. This is the final knot in the digital noose. End of quote. That came straight from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's simply implementing an executive order from President Trump. And so if you think that he's your friend in this, think again.
Scott ought to be fired over that.
Yeah, they're not interested in stopping illegal immigrants from using the banking system. They are interested in surveilling you and shutting you out of using banking, the banking industry, when you do something or say something that displeases the regime. You will be out in the cold, and they will have control over your assets, your digital assets. And, Sam, this reminds me of what's prophesied to happen by John the Revelator. You know, if you don't have the mark of the beast, you're not going to be able to transact in our economy. Well, this is coming. China's already got it, and it's coming to America as well, Sam.
And the interesting thing here is I think Bessent should be fired over this. I really think Trump should be impeached over this very thing. Congress, those who voted for FISA 702, ought to be fired at the next election cycle, so midterms over this. And at the end of the day, hey, we need to get rid of some judges, too. The problem is we got to do it constitutionally, Lowell.
Well, that's fine. We have retention elections for judges here in Utah. I don't know how most of the other states do it, but if the people in our November general election vote no on retaining judges, then they're not retained. They lose their place on the bench. And Utah Republican Party leaders are urging a no vote on the retention of two justices. These are two Supreme Court justices, the Utah Supreme Court, Justice Diana Hagan and Justice Jill Pullman. Why? Well, because they apparently don't understand that the Utah Constitution gives legislature the power to redistrict. And instead, and Judge Gibson, by the way, should not be retained either, although I don't believe her retention election is this year. But clearly, Sam, the Utah Constitution places the responsibility for redistricting in the hands of the legislature, not in the hands of a judge like Judge Gibson, or in the hands of an NGO with which Judge Gibson just happened to concur. Well, Utah Republican Party Chair Rob Axson spoke directly to this issue at the state party nominating convention on April 25th, as did U.S. Representative Burgess Owens. And the party does intend to roll out a campaign not to retain these two justices on the Supreme Court. And Cox, by the way, Governor Cox, supports the party's action to not retain these two justices, even though he's the governor who appointed both of them to the Utah Supreme Court. Very interesting turnabout there, Sam.
All I can tell you is, you know what, folks, pray for us. We need to get rid of these judges. These judges think they're gods or kings. They're not. There's checks and balances. The reason that the legislature has that obligation is they're the closest representatives we have to the people. So it's not democracy. We, the people, don't do it. Our representatives do it. It's not parties, because it wants to be, we need elected people making these decisions. And therefore, hey, that's the way it works. Now, you don't like it, we can talk about it. But until then, we must obey the law, including the judiciary, Lowell.
That's right, Sam. Now, here's a news item you probably didn't hear about on the mainstream media. This Hyperscale data center project in Box Elder County, the west side.
This is crazy town.
Talking about where are they going to store all the surveillance? Well, they're going to store it in another big data center, a hyperscale data center that's being proposed to occupy in the west side of Box Elder County 40,000 acres, Sam. 40,000 acres of privately held land in a remote slice of the desert basin known as Hansel Valley. Well, so Utah's Military Installation Development Authority, which is MIDA for short, MIDA says that private landowners across those sparsely populated and unincorporated portions of the county have already agreed to the use of their land for the multi-billion-dollar project in what is being called the Stratos Project area. What's it going to be? It's going to be a 9-gigawatt data center and gas plant, the largest industrial project in Utah history. No water study has been done, no environmental impact study has been done, no public notice has been made. And I watched a clip about this, Sam, learned that Shark Tank investor Kevin O'Leary is spearheading this project, and it will generate and use more power than the entire state of Utah does currently. And it would include tax deals to lure hyperscalers like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google to the state. I just asked
what's
myself,
it going to run on, Lowell? Is it going to be nuclear, or what's it going to be?
I don't know, Sam. Do they have water power there in the west side of Box Elder County? I don't think so. Is there going to be a coal-fired plant, a gas plant? Well, probably.
Probably a natural gas plant, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably how they're going to generate the power, but they're going to generate more power there than the rest of the state of Utah uses today, annually. It's amazing what they, and the Box Elder County Commission is going to vote on the thing at 10 a.m. this morning. That's in 90 minutes from now. They're going to vote on whether to allow this to go forward in their county. So if you want to urge the commissioners to slow this thing down so that we have a chance to really think about it, for the public to take notice of it and give their input, you can call those three commissioners at 435-734-3347. I'll give that number again. The names of the commissioners are Boyd Bingham, Lee Perry. I kind of think that's the Lee Perry that used to be in the Utah legislature, but I don't know that for sure. And then Tyler Vincent. That number again is 435-734-3347.
And it's important to note, ladies and gentlemen, that if you have one of these kind of proposals in your area, because they're being built all across the country, you also need to be very careful and wise and get into the details of this, baby, because I'm telling you, it'll go south and be a real problem for the people if it's not done right. That's to say the least. Final quick 30 seconds, Lowell, tell us about the good news.
The good news, Trump shrunk the government. Over 350,000 federal employees have either been fired, resigned, or retired and were not replaced. The federal workforce is smaller today than at any point since 1966. Sam?
All right. Thank you so much, Lowell Nelson, everybody. Campaign for Liberty. Great job, sir.
You're welcome, Sam. Good to be with you. Bye now.
CampaignForLiberty.org, RonPaulInstitute.org. I'm Sam Bushman. LibertyRoundtable.com, LibertyNewsRadio.com. We're available on Rumble, Twitter. We're available on YouTube, just about everywhere. God save the Republic of the United States of America.